Between 1963 and 1968, the BBC produced 5 seasons of time-travelling adventures. The titular role and infamous monsters have captivated generations for over half a century. However, 97 episodes of the Doctor's early adventures are missing, believed wiped forever. In this series, we explore one of TV's greatest heroes, the history and influences of these lost classics, in Doctor Who Most Wanted. In this episode, we shall be discussing the lost years of Doctor Who from 1989 to 2005. During this period, many fans of the series produced spin-off books, fanzines and short films. Many of these were not authorised versions by the BBC, but endeavoured to keep Doctor Who in the minds of the viewing public. Joining me today is Gareth Preston and Brian M. Clark.
I'd like to start, Brian, by just asking you, did you rush out and buy a camcorder in the 1980s?
I didn't buy a camcorder. My only experience of filmmaking was 8mm film and Super 8 film, which gave you about 3 minutes each cassette. So it wasn't like the easiest format. But we made a couple of 3-minute films. They were much bigger and better in our heads as we made them, as they eventually turned up on a little silver screen. But they are no more, so that shameful period of my life is gone.
But who knows, they could resurface one day, perhaps.
Well, there's always that threat. The chrononauts could go back and pick them up.
I couldn't afford to buy. I certainly couldn't afford to buy a camera, but we did rent a video camera from Rumbelows as of the time, and myself and some fellow Doctor Who fans produced a couple of what we thought were epic Doctor Who stories. Basically, a lot of people running about in a park, basically, sort of chasing each other in sort of like homemade costumes, and I think it was. And after that, I decided personally to concentrate more on sort of radio stories and stuff rather than video productions.
So,
although,
Gareth, when you made those, were they scripted or were they kind of scenarios and you just
they were properly
on the moment?
They were properly scripted. I wrote a couple. Terror on Drexel 3, which was about a rogue Cyberman loose on a planet. And then a friend of mine, William Nuttall, wrote another one called Small Profit, Quick Return, which was about an evil Time Lord. Not the Master, but similar to the Master,
right. Yeah.
Up to no good. And they were fun, undoubtedly, and occasionally, and copies did get out, and occasionally one resurfaces to embarrass me somewhere. But after that, for a long time, I didn't get involved in any, and then sort of in the noughties, I met a group of fans from Huddersfield who were very talented filmmakers, and we made a few more fan films over the next few years.
I think people tend to forget they were fairly expensive when they came out. I mean, it was a luxury item. And I have about my person, if you just excuse me for 2 seconds, an actual 1990s Sony camcorder. And very basic because it was the viewfinder is actually, when you sort of look down the viewfinder, it's black and white. These days you would have a flip out viewer as well, and that would be in color. But this one has got a, now what's this, picture effect. Now, when I actually looked at that properly, this isn't the original camcorder I had. It was given to me by a friend. It's called Pastel. That's the only effect on it, to be honest. Really. But it's quite advanced because it's got a series of modes on the side. I can see, if you can just see the dial.
Right. Yes.
Sports, portraits. I think outdoors. Beach, it's got a palm tree for a beach, and several other modes of shooting modes. The real issue with these was, of course, editing, because editing equipment was in short supply, affordable editing equipment.
Well, I think partly one of the reasons people make fan films and indeed recreations is they want to take part in that world. In a way, it's another kind of appreciation, I think, similar to writing stories or cosplay.
Let these people go. I beg you. Put power back in their ship and let them go. I will stay here. You can do anything you like with me. Experiment on me. Take my life. Only let them go free. Do not kneel before me. I have cost too many good lives already. Let them go to their own world. We are equals. Master, you and I, we are equals. Let them go. Their lives are worthless. We will use them all to make others. No. No. You and I together, we can study the women. You did not go away because you hate me. You needed time to think, to make new plans. It isn't true what the Earthman says. That you hate me, that I'm your shame. Say it isn't true. Say it isn't true. If I could, I would destroy you. No. No!
Masters of Luxor, which was a series that was going to be made to follow Unearthly Child, Tribe of Gum, but instead it was replaced by the Dalek story, the Nation's Dalek story. So that script lay around for some time, and then a group of fans, 2001 or something, got together and did their version of it. Unfortunately, it's kind of an American version because they were all from the Chicago area in there, and there was no real attempt to capture characterization, but at least they had the scripts to work off, and I think that's quite revealing as a kind of what may have been.
Masters of Luxor is a fascinating story, and it's partly just because it was unmade and lost stories are interesting. It also gives it a slightly, it's Doctor Who before people quite knew what Doctor Who was, so as it does feel a bit different. As you say, it's quite philosophical. It's even quite spiritual, actually.
Yes.
And the Doctor's and all the characterizations are just a little bit off to what we kind of know of those characters. The American version, I do admire them for making it and for trying to kind of, film it in black and white, make those sets. But unfortunately, the American voices, are a bit distracting.
Yeah, they do.
What is it? First, you must stick one of these into it. Then the monitor plays the image. Incredible. But the quality is a bit fuzzy. Fuzzy? Old Earth term I picked up years ago. Where do they get these things? Space Bay? What do they call this thing? A VHS. VHS? A video home system. What a dull name. When Doctor Who was cancelled in 1989, the enduring appeal of the original TV series engaged a new generation of writers. This was further expanded upon by affordable video cameras, giving independent producers the chance to do direct-to-video, which effectively bypassed cinemas and television. Nicholas Briggs would be at the forefront of these Doctor Who-related spin-offs, starting in 1997 with his directorial debut in Auton. As well as appearing in a multitude of on-screen personas in subsequent stories, his superlative vocal talents have more recently been heard in many Dalek stories since the series was revitalized in 2005. From 1991 to 1995, 6 films were produced under the title The Stranger. While many fans have debated the connections with Doctor Who, the first of these stories, entitled Summoned by Shadows, saw several notable actors from the original TV series. Colin Baker, Louise Jameson, Peter Miles, and Michael Wisher. Michael Wisher's acting credits in Doctor Who from 1970 to 1975 covered 36 episodes. These include some of the most memorable storylines, but he is chiefly remembered as playing Davros in The Genesis of the Daleks. Many of the Stranger storylines centred on one location or studio set, which neatly allowed for budget productions, something which previous producers have opted for on the original show. Despite divided opinions between fans, the Stranger series was considered by many as Doctor Who in another name. The evidence suggests that Colin Baker was forced to capitulate the role of the Doctor after only 11 stories, which at that point was the shortest tenure any actor had been afforded in the role, which lent further conviction that the role of the Stranger was a reprise of the Doctor. This theory, however, was disputed with the departure of Miss Brown, played by Nicola Bryant. By the 4th story, the series then came into its own and moved forward with new themes and concepts. Despite several audio productions, the Stranger video series ended in 1995. The story of fan-based spin-offs have, if anything, continued to appear on social media with many other recreations and animations. Undoubtedly, the Doctor's on-screen presence hasn't run out of time just yet.
And The Stranger is an interesting example how it developed over the years. The first few are kind of, well, it could be the 6th Doctor, who's like gone off and dropped out and decided to call himself something else instead. He didn't have a name, in fact. He was literally The Stranger. And then about halfway through, I think around the time that the Paul McGann movie was coming up and Doctor Who looked like it might become an actual program again, and the Stranger series then took a turn and they suddenly invented their own mythology about the character.
This is with the Preceptors, isn't it?
Yeah, the Preceptors.
Yeah.
It all happened in the Terror game, and suddenly
Yes.
And
the Protectorate, wasn't it? Yes.
Protectorate.
Yes.
And it was actually, I was quite excited at the time watching the Terror game and thinking, oh, they've got this new mythology. We could go anywhere. And unfortunately, after that, the series became quite domestic. It's remained very earthbound, and I think it was a case of a lot of people were trying to prove that they could make real TV drama, quotation marks, and so unfortunately it kind of petered out, the series, towards the end.
But also, by creating that strong backstory, that became the spine of the series. So it did limit them just deciding to have an adventure anywhere in time and space. Instead, they were kind of really focused on this character of Lestrange, and him being, he was created out of some kind of memory experiment, wasn't he?
He was a sort of, they'd wiped, he was once a great hitman, and they wiped his mind and sent him on the Estrangement program.
Just moving on slightly, the fan base is prolific, isn't it? It really is, the way that people come up with ideas. And it didn't just stop when the series came back in 2005. The Millennium Trap was a great sort of fan-based film, wasn't it?
I was very impressed with it. I mean, production-wise, from my limited experience of being involved in fan films and other low-budget films, and knowing how hard it is to even do something simple, and it does feel like late 80s Doctor Who story. It has that feel to it, and there's a particular moment which I will not reveal because I don't want to spoil it for people who haven't seen it, but there was a big revelation cliffhanger, and I thought, wow, I'm really excited now. This is like watching Doctor Who. This is
Snow?
Silica, whatever did that was immensely hot.
It's even over all the branches. Very strange. I want to go back, but there's something inside me telling me to go on.
Earth. I never thought I'd be so glad to wake up one rainy day in the smoke ever again. Until now, that is.
You're from London too?
Not originally. You?
Yes. Strange. Here we are in a petrified forest on an alien planet. And we're talking like polite English strangers. Everything seems irrelevant, except...
Except what?
I can't help thinking about that poor driver when they find him dead.
Don't. The only thing that matters now is us, our survival. Our past has no real relevance here.
I suppose the most successful of all the recreations is, of course, Mission to the Unknown, which is University of Central Lancashire. I just felt that was an amazing production by Andrew Ireland with the students, and Edward D'Souza introduces it, which was a real scoop, I think, to get Mark Corey waxing lyrical about it.
That Mission to the Unknown was such an impressive production. It was kind of an answer to your earlier question, is it? Sort of like about remaking Lost Stories, and that is a brilliant example of somewhere where they stuck to the script and they did it as much as possible in a sort of 1965 kind of style, and it pays off brilliantly. But generally, I suppose, knowing the amount of time and effort that goes into making a film, I'd say do your own, move forward, I would say, and do your own stuff.
I'm kind of torn, and I'm very old school. I think if you're bringing back a lost episode or a lost series, I think you should try and make it as much like the original as you can, because for me, its place in history is to go on your film shelf in that row and fill in the gap of that particular Doctor, and there's my episode. So although visually it's very clunky, Power of the Daleks works for me because I've got little cine shots, and I've got film, and I've got little bits kind of coming alive for me, and I have the original soundtrack to it. All that works for me, and it recreates the episode in there, and I feel like I've got as near as possible to something that I believe no longer exists. Someone might turn it up in South Africa. I don't know. Fingers crossed in there. But yeah, so if I'm recreating, I'd like to do it as much like the original as possible. But as Gareth has said, the idea of doing your own Doctor Who story is very attractive.
3 things I would like to be remade is there are 3 missing Nigel Neal plays that and I would love The Road and The Chopper and The Wine of India, which are all lost from the archives, to be remade and either reimagined or authentically. I think certainly anything original. Doctor Who is a lovely, flexible format, so you can say, I'm going to do this in the style of, an Akira Kurosawa samurai film, or no, I'm going to do this in the style of a silly symphony, and everyone will have that kind of bouncy, elastic kind of look to them. And but I think if you're recreating something, then I think you are a bit more constrained. As in these animations, I think they feel they've got to be fairly realistic. I don't think if they'd gone for a much more sort of caricatured look with the characters, which they could have gone down a sort of Batman the Animated, which is a great example of an animation where everyone's kind of a big caricature of a and it works in that vein. But with Doctor Who, I think there is a constraint that it needs to kind of look pretty realistic.
Well, also there's something about the way in which serial TV is produced, that there's already a template existing when they bring the director in for the next story. And the actors have their characters pretty well defined. Set designers know roughly what the visual language is for the series. There's all that's preset, and the director comes in and slots himself or herself into that. Now, with what you're talking about now, about animation or going off and recreating, you don't have the limits, if you like, or the scaffolding, it depends which way you want to see it, of having all that pre-design work and pre-characterization set for you. If you want, you can just change it.
Funnily enough, just on the way home tonight, friend of mine who's been watching Doctor Who, and he said, been watching the Sea Devils, and it's brilliant apart from that music. We can't stand that. For people who don't know, it has a very experimental electronic kind of score to it. It's more atmospheric than music, really. And I was thinking about this, and I was thinking, if they, took that story and then they got a new composer in and say, give us a more traditional sort of score. And I think that would be a terrible thing to do. I think, in the case of the Sea Devils, or another story to say, I think that's a bit arrogant to sort of say, we're going to show you how it should have been done.
Right. Yes.
On a final question for this evening, gentlemen, do you think, apart from Doctor Who, has there been really any successful remakes, truly successful remakes in terms of films or TV shows of latter years that you could think of?
I think, the ones that come to mind for me is Battlestar Galactica. I think the reimagined and the newly politicized series that came out 20 odd years ago now, we're ashamed to say, was a huge improvement on the post Star Wars one. I think that works immensely well, and I very much think that Sabrina the Teenage Witch works much better now as a horror drama rather than the half-hour sitcom it originally was, although it was originally in comic books. But I think the remake works a lot better. The one I'd say doesn't work is Lost in Space. I think they tried to make it too hard, too real, too gritty, and it lost what was at its core just a family adventure in space.
I was going to mention Battlestar Galactica as well, and that's probably the definitive of something that was remade, and they found something. That's it. They found the good stuff and retooled it and made it speak to another age. I'd just like to couple onto that the surprisingly good, for me, remake of Danger Mouse, which I know it's a kids a kids series, but I think the new version that they've made is in some ways even funnier, I think.
Well, no, I agree. And if we're talking about kid vid, I'd say the remake from 10 years ago or so of Captain Scarlet, because they really upped the science fiction content in it.
Yes, I think they did, and the characterization.
Yes,
as well.
Yes.
Well, I'm going to ask Gareth one more question just before we all go our separate ways into time and space. Gareth, if the BBC phoned you up today and said, Gareth, we're going to make you a director, and we want you to remake any episode of Doctor Who, which one would you choose?
Oh, now that is a question. That is an interesting question. If you mean by episode, you mean story. Probably. I might go for the Myth Makers, which I think is a very underrated story. I think it's actually, listening to it again recently, it's very light on its feet. It's quite funny. In fact, it's very funny in places. And yes, I think I might. Yes, I think I might go for that. I think.
Interesting choice, actually, because that's season 3, and it's the season that's probably got the largest gaps of missing stories and episodes, etc. And of course, the Myth Makers is the departure of Vicky, who I think is probably. We haven't seen too much of her in sort of latter years. So, yeah, an interesting choice. Thank you. So, Mr. Clark.
There's one episode, and it's only a one episode, and it came about because they had production issues. And the title's gone, but you guys will throw it at me straight away. It's the one where they had no sets, so they set it all in the TARDIS. And the TARDIS becomes stuck in space, and all the clocks are going crazy. I'm pretty certain it's the Chesterton era story.
It sounds like the Edge of Destruction.
That's the very that's exactly what they called it. Yes. So it's awful because it was rushed, and they were still getting new pages of the script as they were on the floor filming, and they were inventing ways around it. They didn't have the resources for it. They didn't have the time. And I think to come back to it now and add another level to it of kind of Doctor Who peculiarity would make it very good.
Once again, gentlemen, it's been an absolute pleasure to talk to you, and thank you so much for giving your insight onto the fan base of remakes